What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHawks42 on the internet, and today we are looking at more Core Set 2021 spoilers. And today I want to talk about a very special card that is near and dear to my heart, and that is Carrion Grub. Carrion Grub? Carrion Grub. I think it's Carrion Grub, as in like I'm carrying grub, as in like delivering food or something. Like I'm hauling food from one area to another. I'm carrying grub. Anyway, sorry, that was really, really bad, even by my standards. So, what is carrion grub? It is a 0/5 insect for 4. 3 generic, 1 black. Right there, stat line, terrible. So you got to see, okay, there's got to be something else going on here, especially because this is an uncommon. Carrion grub gets plus X plus 0, where X is the greatest power among creature cards in your graveyard. I dig this. I dig this a lot, actually, because in self-mill strategies, one of the things that you need to have is decent payouts, like decent value for having something in your graveyard, because otherwise the hoops that you jump through to fill that sucker is just not worth it. And one of the most classic examples of quality self-mill payouts is reanimation. If your deck is full of really big creatures, you chuck them all into the bin, and you take one of them and just pull them out again. So that's really useful. This also combines beautifully with the Titans. Like, so the first thing I think of is Croxa with this, because Croxa is a turn 2 play that puts a 6/6 in your graveyard. That means Carrion Grub here is going to be a 6/5 for 4 if you have a Croxa in your graveyard. That's pretty darn slick. So that's just nice. Like, that's just good value in the right kind of setup. So it's a solid card. It's really just not that bad. But in addition to that ability, that static ability, it has when Carrion Grub enters the battlefield, mill 4 cards. And you heard me correctly. The card is printed with the words mill 4 cards. Now, if you're wondering what does that mean, then you don't understand the significance of it, and that is perfectly fine. You are more than welcome to be here. Thank you for hanging out. New players welcome, of course. What mill is referring to is the act of taking cards from your library and just immediately putting them directly into your graveyard. That is an expression that dates all the way back to the very beginnings of the game, specifically with a card called Millstone. It was the very first card that leveraged this ability, and it was an artifact for 2, where the owner of the artifact would pay 2, tap it, to make target player put the top 2 cards of his or her library into his or her graveyard. So, okay, so that, it is what it is. It mills because it's the millstone. That's the name. That's where it came from. And people have colloquially been saying mill for decades. And, like, not messing around, decades. Like, back in the 90s, people were saying mill to refer to the action of taking cards from a library and putting them directly into the graveyard. And reanimation strategies, or laboratory maniac / Thassa's Oracle strategies, where you ultimately try to just blow up your own library in order to win the game, they leverage a lot of mill effects as well. And so Carrion Grub is a way of closing out a game while milling yourself. So if you have cards like Croxa that get benefit from cards being in the graveyard, as well as put fatties in the graveyard, that's going to be really handy. You're going to be able to get some real value out of that. And you could actually end up beating your opponent down with a Carrion Grub to win the game. That's great. Like, that's just freaking cool. I don't see any issue with this whatsoever. It's just a lovely, cool card. And the biggest thing that I see here, the introduction of mill as a keyword. If you're an old school player like me, well, by a lot of people's consideration, I'm not exactly old school. I played back in Mirrodin, Ravnica, the OG Ravnica, and Kamigawa. Those were like my big sets. And back then, like, mill was never a keyword, but what also happened during that time is the keyword vigilance was created. However, vigilance got kind of grandfathered in as an evergreen keyword because they had been printing cards that had attacking does not cause this to tap on it for years. And finally, they just realized, man, I'm getting really sick of spending a line and a half on this sentence that we just keep copying and pasting into every frickin' creature. Or, we end up copying and pasting into 3 white creatures in every single set. Like, could we just give that a word already? And they finally just put a keyword on it called vigilance, and nobody's thought anything of it looking back. Something similar happened with Shroud, actually. Shroud and Hexproof both started as non-evergreen keywords that they have since given keywords to, and then since then given them evergreen status, meaning that they've used them over and over and over again throughout time. Now, milling is interesting because it doesn't function as a keyword necessarily in the way that we think of them. A lot of the time, I think of abilities on creatures as being keywords, whereas in this case, we're referring to an action. You're referring to an actual event that occurs. And they're taking the colloquial phrase that the community has said over years and years and years, and finally just put a frickin' ring on it and made it official. Mill is now an official part of Magic the Gathering, and as someone who has attempted a number of different mill strategies over the years, I'm happy to see it finally get its due, because I think this was about time. Like, it's just straight up about time that this was going to be a keyword. I was of the impression that it was never going to be a keyword. Like, this is never anything I was campaigning for, because what were the chances? Like, my thought was, if they were going to do it, they would have done it by now. And so I didn't expect mill to ever be present on a card. But here it is. It's right here in front of us on Carrion Grub. And this is actually not the first one that's been spoiled from Core Set 21 that has had mill on it. I'm just using it for today's example because it was spoiled today. And well, it was a relatively slow day for spoilers, as best I can tell. So yeah, so this is Carrion Grub. And the other part about it that I absolutely adore is I love reanimator strategies. And so what this is telling me is that there is a decent chance that, you know, there's a non-zero chance that there's going to be a very legitimate graveyard-based strategy in this limited environment. So in Core Set 21 drafts, I'm betting we're going to be seeing some more reanimation style or more self-mill style effects, and I think that's really cool. It's a strategy I really like. I've tried to force it a couple of times in Ikoria draft, and it's not pretty, let me tell you what. And so, I don't know, I'm hopeful. And if nothing else, this gives graveyard-based strategies a really big creature that can potentially deal a lot of damage. And you can build around this in a lot of cool ways. The very first thing I thought of was Kroxa, because that's a 6/6 that puts itself in the graveyard for 2. So, okay, like, yeah, that one, like, that writes itself. It's pretty straightforward how well that works with it. But another one that I want to just throw out there, if you're playing a Golgari strategy, Titanoth Rex is an 11/11 that cycles for 2. So you can put an 11/11 in your graveyard on turn 2. So if you have a way of getting Carrion Grub down on turn 4, you have an 11/5. You have an 11/5 on turn 4. Seems pretty good. Like, I could be wrong, but yeah. I think that's pretty darn good. So the next question is, how are we going to actually win the game with that? I'm guessing we need to give it some kind of evasion, or we just need to have a bunch of them, because there's nothing wrong with that either. The other cool thing is, if you have a Titanoth Rex in your hand, and you have a Carrion Grub on the board, you could cycle Titanoth Rex to give it a boost, and that ability all of a sudden functions like a combat trick on top of everything else. So put some keyword counters on this thing, and oh boy, yeah, it's going to get crazy, you guys. Absolutely crazy. Like, actually, just Titanoth Rex alone with Carrion Grub. Titanoth Rex is cycle for 2, target creature gets plus 11/0 and put a trample counter on it. Carrion Grub can straight up go from an 11/5, or sorry, you can go from a 0/5 to an 11/5 with trample at instant speed. Think about that for a second. That's insane. Yeah, I can't wait to see this thing in action. I'm really excited for it. The more I see from Core Set 21, the happier I am. And I can't wait to see what they come up with tomorrow. So thank you so much for hanging out, guys. And sorry, plugs. That's the thing I usually do here. So I'm on Twitch, twitch.tv/hamhawks42. You can also catch me over on Twitter @hawks42. This podcast is available anywhere you get your fine podcasts, as well as on YouTube. So thank you very much, and I will catch you next time.